Okay, let's open with prayer. Gracious God, we give you thanks that you have brought us into relationship with you, that you are the very one who gave us life to begin with. And as we reflect on what it means to say that you are our Creator, we ask that your Spirit would be with us to lead and guide us in our thoughts and in our discussion. For we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so, okay, I'm going to just skip through these really quick because it didn't, no, that's going to be a bad way to do it. No, I went too far. Here we go, that's where I wanted to start. All right. So where we're going to pick up is the topic of the Trinity. That's where we kind of then ended off last week, was talking about the Trinity. And so we're going to explore the Trinity. And in this session, we're going to look at the first person of the Trinity. So there's a beginning point, and that is to say God is creator. Now, this is not an unusual statement for a religion to make. Most religions have some kind of a creation story, and that's because as humans look at the universe around them, they have always wondered, where did all this come from? Right? As they see the beauty of nature, as they see the intricacy of nature, as they see the world providing for us all that we need for life, the obvious question is, where did this come from? We know where things come from that we create. So like, there's this house that I built, there's this crop that I grew or whatever. So the assumption is, if there's something in existence, then somebody or something had to have brought it into existence, right? So where did all this come from? And so we have affirmed, religions have answered this question by affirming that God, or in some cases the gods, brought the world, including humans, into being. And so now in the last few centuries, science has also asked the question of origins. And this has led to an apparent conflict with faith. Now, when I teach this at Luther College, this is something that I want to make sure that I cover fairly early in the semester, simply because there are students who already think that, because of science, then faith is irrelevant. Like science has proved that that creation happened differently than we've learned in religion and whatnot. So part of what we're going to do today is talk about that apparent conflict between faith and science. But first of all, we need to understand that the first conflicts with the Judeo-Christian understanding of creation were astronomical in nature. That is, Copernicus and then later Galileo observed that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way. Okay, so if you read scriptures, it's the sun that's revolving around the earth, or going from one place to the other, and so the earth is the center of the universe. And then Copernicus and then later Galileo came along to say, no, actually it's the other way around. It's the earth that revolves around the sun. So heliocentric. And one of the things I point out is that Copernicus, who preceded Galileo by almost a century, was actually funded by the church. His research was funded by the church. Because the church was interested in learning how God's creation works. And so he was a scientist who was trying to figure stuff out, and they funded him. And then, a few generations later, when you have Galileo, he was actually a friend of the Pope. And when he, confirmed Copernicus's theory, the Pope had to say, Galileo, you have to be quiet about this because it's undermining faith. And so that's, sort of the famous conflict where it begins. But then a few centuries later, we have Charles Darwin, the biologist, and his theory of evolution, which led to further conflicts with people of faith, sort of like his the origin of species and the theory of evolution and all that stuff. A lot of people felt that conflicted with faith. So the question I ask is science in conflict with faith? And to answer that, I'm going to go a very different route than you might expect. We're going to talk about a person and what they taught me and what that helps us understand in terms of the connection between science and faith. So, any of you, I'm sure you recognize this place, right? What is this place? That's right. It's the retreat center at Lumsden. It used to be St. Michael's Retreat Center. It was run by the Franciscans for many, many years. And sadly, they just got to the point where there was too few of them to keep it going. And they had to sell it. And it's no longer a Franciscan place. But in my early time here, I would actually take my class out to St. Michael's Retreat Center to have a day-long retreat. And one of the people that they would talk to, or who would come and make a presentation, his name was Father Lucien Kemble. And Father Lucien was a Franciscan, and he was also a priest. Now, you can be a Franciscan without being a priest, because the original Franciscan order was a lay order, but he happened to be both. But he was a marvelous person to talk to, and he was one of the best natural scientists that I know. He was a keen observer of nature. In fact, he saw that as being directly in line with his Franciscan heritage, and he observed both the biological world, but also the universe. He was a very good amateur astronomer. In fact, he was so good that he has a star cluster named after him. It's called Kemble's Cascade. So can you see that line of stars? It kind of looks like a little bit like rapids flowing down. It was Father Lucien who found this and then realized that nobody else had identified this system, and so it got named after him. He's told us that if you know where to look, you can see this system even just with a decent pair of binoculars. You don't need a high-powered telescope or anything like that, just a decent pair of binoculars looking in the right part of the sky. He had articles published in astronomy journals and stuff like that. So he really was a keen observer of the universe and the world. And it was Father Lucien who introduced me to something known as the Fibonacci sequence. And so the Fibonacci numbers is what we're going to explore for the next few minutes. Some of you may know what these are, but others of you, this might be the first time you're introduced to them. So first of all, who was Fibonacci? Leonardo Fibonacci was a mathematician in the Middle Ages in Europe. He was known by other names like Leonardo of Pisano or Leonardo of Pisa. You know, the Leaning Tower of Pisa, that's where he was from. We don't know much about his life except for what we have in his mathematical writings. And those are significant because it's our modern algebra and geometry comes from him. So he was born probably around 1170, and he received his early education from a Muslim schoolmaster. One of the things that was interesting for me to discover about this period of history is that it was the Muslims in southern Spain who had the highest level of civilization in Europe at that time. And they had culture, they had art, they had education. The largest city in Europe at that time was Cordoba. Cordoba at that time had 1 million inhabitants. And if you compared that with London and Paris at that time, London and Paris were like 15,000 compared to 1 million. So it was the Muslim scholars in southern Spain that carried on the tradition of this education, passing on the education. And then it was through people like Fibonacci that it became more broadly known throughout Europe. So his first book was published in 1202 called Liber Abaca. This book is devoted to arithmetic and elementary algebra. And his next book, Practica Geometria, he wrote in 1220, and this presented geometry and trigonometry with going back to its original Greek origins. Okay? Now, he was the first person, I shouldn't say people, to introduce the Hindu Arabic number system to Europe, the system used today. So prior to this, what were they using? Roman numerals, right? X, XI, XII, XIII, that kind of way. So, the numbers we're used to, 1, 2, 3, designated the way they are, that comes to us through India and Arabia. That's where that number system was developed. And now Fibonacci is introducing it to Europe. His work, Liber Abaca, remained the European standard for more than 2 centuries, replacing the Roman numeral system. And there's a statue of him near the Leaning Tower of Pisa. So if you ever go to Pisa, see the Leaning Tower, take a look at Fibonacci as well. All right, now, what is the Fibonacci sequence? That's what we're here for. The sequence, actually, before we get to that, I'll say it verbally, and then we'll go through it. So here's the sequence. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, and so forth. Okay? And the way the sequence is determined is you take the 2 previous numbers, add them together to get the next number. So 1 and 1 makes 2, 1 and 2 makes 3, 2 and 3 makes 5, and so on and so forth, right? And what Fibonacci discovered is that this is found in nature, and this is what Lucien Kimball pointed out to me. So he would find the Fibonacci sequence all throughout nature, and anytime he went out for a walk or whatever, he would look for Fibonacci numbers. One example of that is the seed head of like a sunflower or something like that. If you look at the spirals, you will see that they always number a Fibonacci number. So in this case, if you look at the spirals going clockwise, there's 34 of them. And the spirals going counterclockwise are 21. So 2 Fibonacci numbers, all right? And 2 consecutive Fibonacci numbers. So that's one of the ones. Now, this pattern of spirals you find in other things too, like pine cones, pineapples, and cauliflower. Yesterday, by the way, for the first time, I had deep-fried cauliflower. Anyone had deep-fried cauliflower? Yeah, like it was like Joshua ordered it, and it was like, oh, I actually kind of like it. It was breaded and had garlic in it, and it was, anyways, I said, that's my favorite way to have cauliflower. Anyways, so now let's take a look at how you see this. I remember Lucien used the example of a pineapple. So he would go to a grocery store and he would pick up a pineapple, and then he would count the rows each way. So you can imagine going into a store and you see this guy going 1, 2, 3. But that's what he did. So if you look at a pine cone, then looking from the top, you can see again you've got 13 one way and 8 the other way, the spirals. Okay? So now at the bottom of this page, by the way, you can see the Fibonacci sequence going up to 2,584. So, I mean, it's a sequence that just continues indefinitely. Now, a few more places where you find it in nature is petals of plants. So there's I think that's a brown-eyed Susan, I think is what that is, 13 petals. But here's lots of examples. So you've got flowers with 1 petal, flowers with 2 petals, flowers with 3, 5, 8, and 13, and so forth. And so that's one of the things Lucian would do. He would find like a wildflower, and then he would count how many petals does it have. And almost always, it's a Fibonacci number. Okay? Now we're going to talk about the Fibonacci spiral. And you have to watch how this, it's not really an animation, but it kind of is. This will show you how the spiral is built. So you start with something that's 1 unit by 1 unit, okay? So a 1 unit square, you add to it 1. Now you have something that has got 2 units on a side, so you add a 2 unit thing. Now you got something that's got 3 units, so you add a 3 unit. Now you got something that's got 5 units, and so forth, on and on. You just keep adding. Now, what you do is you take a pen or whatever, and you intersect all these boxes. And so this is what it looks like. Here we go. There. Okay, you see how you just kind of draw the intersection around? Okay. That spiral, which is sometimes called a Fibonacci spiral, that spiral is also found all over in nature. Like a nautilus shell is probably the most famous example that's on the left there. The shape of a human ear, shape of an egg, the shape of hurricanes, right? And you can go even farther out, the shape of spiral galaxies. So this spiral shows up both in humongous things like spiral galaxies and also in very small things like ferns, how ferns grow. So you got the Fibonacci spiral. Another place you find it is in the growth of trees. When you were young, you might have, and you were drawing a tree, in elementary school, you usually would draw 1 trunk, and then you would branch it off into 2, and then each of those would branch off. And then what you ended up with was something that didn't quite look like a tree, but you couldn't quite figure it out. Well, that's because it was too symmetrical, and it didn't grow according to the Fibonacci sequence. So if you watch here, you've got these different stages, and you've got, there it is. Okay? So again, Lucian, when he was out, he would look at, how a tree might be branching out. And he would see that at the first stage, it's 1, and then that would be, the next stage would eventually get to 2, which branch out into 3, which branch out into 5, which branch out into 8, and so forth. Right? All right. So now there's something known as the Fibonacci, or the golden ratio, which comes from the Fibonacci sequence. And the golden ratio is simply if you take the 2 numbers and put them against each other. And so if you go far enough down, like 233 next to 377, you end up with the ratio of 1.6180 and so forth, right? All right. That ratio is also found all over. It's known by the Greek letter phi. That's, so if you were doing algebra, you would use phi to describe this. And it leads to the golden rectangle. So a golden rectangle is something that is used in architecture, especially by the Greeks. They use this all the time. But where you might find it is it's the shape of a playing card. So like a normal card is shaped, whether people realize that that's what it is, it's shaped with this ratio of 61.8 to 100. So, like I said, it showed up in Greek architecture, known as the golden rectangle. And so the architecture of Greek buildings, used this rectangle in all kinds of ways. And the reason why the Greeks used this is because they said it was the most aesthetically pleasing of all rectangles. Okay? The most aesthetically appealing or pleasing. And so it shows up all over in their architecture. And then it also then, when the Renaissance came along, the Renaissance artists picked up on this. They studied Greek architecture and art, and they said, and so you find it in all kinds of places, like in Leonardo da Vinci's work. you'll find it. And so here I'll show you the most famous painting by Leonardo is the Mona Lisa. Notice the shape of the face is a golden rectangle, right? But that's not all. Watch this. You can take the spiral and you can just draw the spiral and see how it all fits. And so Leonardo da Vinci understood this principle and used it in creating art. Why? Because he felt that was the most aesthetically pleasing image for us. It seemed what humans appreciated. So why would they appreciate this? That's the question. But he didn't answer it. He just said, this is the thing. All right. Here's one of my favorite things is the human body. And my favorite is that one, the x-ray of the hand there. So the hand, if you look at the middle finger there, if you take the first portion of your finger as a unit of 2, the next one will be 3, the next one will be 5, and then in your wrist here is 8. Now, obviously, sometimes that's not always exactly right, but generally speaking. And then there's lots of other examples in nature where you see the proportions are there. We use it all the time in music. I never understood. When I was growing up, I used to say, why was it like 2 black notes grouped with 3 black notes and blah, blah, blah. But they all are based on Fibonacci. So you've got a group of 2 and then a group of 3, and then you've got a group of 3 and a group of 5. And then you've got, if you add all that together, you get a group of 5 and a group of 8. So the octave, as we understand it, and as we use it all the time in music, is based on the Fibonacci sequence. Right? Is this starting to blow your minds? Yeah. So this is what Lucian said. He said, for him, the Fibonacci sequence is like the fingerprint of God. It shows divine presence and divine intention. So just like a sculpture might have the fingerprint of the artist on it as evidence of who did this, who created this art piece, Lucian Kimball would say the Fibonacci sequence for him was evidence of divine intention, divine handiwork, and so on and so forth. And so how did he arrive at this? Through observation, scientific observation of the world. Now, what he didn't do, which is part of the scientific process, is he didn't do repeatable experiments, but he did repeatable observations. That's what he did. So in that sense, he was following the scientific method. So Lucian Kimball was the one who I said, the person I knew personally who exemplified good science and good faith. Now, there are other examples, and I usually point these out to my class. These are scientists who are also people of faith, specifically Christian faith. So this is John Polkinghorne. He was an English theoretical physicist, and he was a professor of mathematical physics at the University of Cambridge in Britain from 68 to 79. Then in 1979, he quit his position as the professor, and he became an Anglican priest and Church of England priest. And some of his fellow physicists said, "What are you doing? Why are you have this good position in this world-renowned university? Why are you stopping this?" And he said this. He said, "Well, in the world of physics, any major contributions that a person makes are done before the age of 40. So if you think about Einstein, all his important work was done before he was even 30 or thereabouts. And so John Polkinghorne said, I've made my contribution to that world, and now I want to make my contribution to a different world. So he became a priest in the Church of England. But he wrote many books about the connection or the way that science and faith can connect. And so I've read some of his books, and they're very interesting. So that's in the realm of physics. But I also have an example from the realm of biology, and that is this person. His name is Francis Collins. He's an American molecular biologist, or geneticist, you might say. And he led, probably the most significant thing he did is he led the Human Genome Project, which was to map the human DNA. He was the leader of that. And most recently, he served as director of National Institutes of Health. So, you know, what was his name? He was in the media all the time during the pandemic. Francis Collins was his boss, right? So he oversaw all the scientific endeavors in the areas of medicine and health and whatnot. Brilliant man. In fact, the Human Genome Project, to give you an example, when they first set out to do this, I think they set aside more than a decade to accomplish the task. They thought that's how long it's going to take. And in fact, they finished it in less than a decade. I think it was about 7 years. So he's highly acknowledged as a top-notch scientist, and yet he's also an evangelical Christian. And he teaches Sunday school and stuff like that. So these are two examples that I use to illustrate that a person can be a very competent and very dedicated scientist and yet also be a person of faith. And obviously, faith and science then are not in conflict in their minds, right? So I use those examples. There's lots of other examples that can be used, but these two are more recent. All right, so what do we conclude? There is no inherent conflict between science and faith. They each ask different questions. Science asks how, questions of mechanics and functioning, right? Faith asks why, questions of meaning and purpose. So if you understand that they're asking different questions, right, then you can understand that they do not need to be in conflict with each other. So unless one attempts to read the creation accounts in Genesis as a scientific textbook, the Bible does not come into conflict with scientific understanding of the world's origins. So this is one of the most important things that we need to understand, is that when the ancients wrote the creation accounts that we have in the book of Genesis, right, they were not approaching it with scientific thinking, because scientific thinking didn't even exist until a few centuries ago, right? They were always approaching it from the question point of what is the meaning of all this? And I'm going to try and help unpack that by looking at the creation stories, which we'll get to in a minute. So before we get to that, let me stop, because I went through an awful lot of material real quick here. And I want to see if you have any questions or comments. If anyone out in Zoom land, if you have a question or comment, just unmute yourself and speak up. Yes, Ray.
Well, I actually have a degree in biology with studied Darwinism.
Yep.
Quite extensively. But I never, at some point, I began to think that there was no conflict between religion and science, and that the story of Genesis, we have no idea what the meaning of the time was.
Yeah.
That one day could have been thousands of years,
Yeah.
millions of years perhaps,
Yeah.
but that wouldn't have made any sense to people at the time, or even now. The whole idea that there isn't time has no understanding,
Yeah.
really.
The Hebrew word that's translated as day in Genesis 1, if I remember correctly, is bara, and it can also mean era. You know, so in the first era, in the second era. Now the way it's written, it is like a day, because you have sunrise, sunset kind of thing. But we're gonna look at those creation stories more completely. We got a question in the chat here. Okay, thank you, Lynn. Yeah, and I actually put this together even before I was cycling, so I can't say my cycling was on my mind. All right, well, any other questions or comments? Yes?
I have a very nice positive story because Wednesday nights out at Lumsden they're really set up for AA people, but later on everybody could go and it became very spiritual.
Yeah.
And there was a guy that was really a pain in the behind because he questioned and he didn't want to fight it, but the Fibonacci was the thing that got him. And he today is very devout.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So it was the Fibonacci sequence that
Well,
changed him.
Lutheran was, you know.
Yeah. I really miss that guy.
Oh.
Yeah, like he had such a gentle spirit about him too, you know, and was so, I don't know, he just had this integrity about him. Yeah. Anyways, so I like to talk about Lucian whenever I get a chance because, you know, he was such a neat person.
This might be off topic a little, but how do fractals come into that? Are they the exact same thing? Or
No, but I think they are related, but I can't remember how. But fractals, there is some connection with fractals, but I can't remember what exactly it is. Larry.
Fractals seem to be more mysterious randomness. Did I say it right? Randomness. You know, that you see sequences that are random, but they seem to fit together.
Yeah.
Where Fibonacci is very predictable, like you said.
Yeah.
It's a sequence of numbers that is definite.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where fractals seem to be random organization.
Yeah, but that form perpetual patterns.
Yeah.
Like, or you know, like,
Goes on forever.
yeah, goes on forever.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, there is so much that we don't know. And even as science progresses, what science says is it's sort of everything, it's almost like everything you learn teaches you there's more that you don't know. And so that's just, you know, the reality of it, which requires, I think, humility. I think humility is required to be a good scientist. I think you have to have enough humility to say, you know, we really don't understand how some of this works. Even physics, you know, like there was Einsteinian physics, right? And then quantum physics came after him, and that kind of threw all kinds of new questions up into the air and whatnot. So, all right. Well, we're not here to talk about science, and I'm not a scientist, but I appreciate them deeply. What we are here to talk about is faith, and the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at the Apostles' Creed. And we're going to look at Article 1, which I think many of you will know. This is the one-sentence article. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. So that's the article we're going to look at. And in fact, that will be how our unit, this block is going to end. If we can even get through all this material. How are we doing? We're doing okay for time. Well, yes and no, but. Let's take a look. To say that God is creator is to say that God is responsible for all that we see around us. Okay? In some way, God is responsible for all that we see around us, all that we have in this world of ours and in this universe of ours. That is to say that God provides us with a place to live and everything necessary for life. So this world, and this is one of the things we've discovered with scientific inquiry, this world is incredibly well balanced for human life. You know, we're just the right distance from the sun, we have just the right amount of atmosphere and magnetic field, and on and on and on it goes, so that human life can exist. And if just one thing was a little bit different, we would not be able to live. That is one of the reasons why there is concern over the increasing temperature of the earth or climate change, is because will we get to the point where it becomes difficult for humans to live? Like we know that that there's a certain point at which the human body cannot cool itself sufficiently to survive. And so in some of the places like India and whatnot, where they can have some really extreme weather, it can be dangerous. Well, we've even seen when there was that heat wave in BC, right? There were people who were dying from the heat. So if things are, and obviously go the opposite direction, if it gets too cold, that becomes impossible to live too. So we live in this highly balanced world, and I have an incredible amount of admiration for the balance, even in terms of one of the most astounding things. And I remember Doug Sovereign said this was the thing that for him as a scientist. Doug Sovereign, you may remember, was a member of the congregation here, married to Kristen Sovereign, who became a pastor. But Doug worked for the Saskatchewan Research Council. And as a young man, what made him strengthen his faith was his look into just the properties of water. So you have water, this simple molecule, H2O, and yet it exists in 3 states, a solid, a liquid, and a gas. And all 3 states are important for our functioning in the world, how we live, and so on and so forth. And he was just fascinated. Here's the one property that, for example, that I remember him illustrating. So when ice freezes, or when water freezes, turns to ice, right? Unlike other things that will sink, ice floats. What does that enable? That enables fish and other things to survive the winter, because the ice has not sunk to the bottom and eventually filled up the pond. There was always liquid underneath. What did that mean for humans? It means humans could access water by drilling through the ice and getting to the water below, because the ice floated. And that's a unique property to ice. Other things, when they hit the solid, right, become more dense and sink. Ice becomes less dense and floats. And so it was things like that Doug Sovereign said, that's astounding. So God provides us with a place to live and everything necessary for life. To say that God is creator does not mean that people of faith cannot use science as a way to understand the workings of the world. Right? So those are not contradictory endeavors, right? As illustrated by people like John Polkinghorne and Francis Collins. The biblical story of creation is intended to tell us who, not how. So the creation accounts are written to affirm that we are here on purpose, not by accident, and that God is the one who has brought us into being. Now, these were supposed to show up one at a time, and I obviously got this wrong, but if we look at the specific words in this first article, the one word that pops out is obviously the word Father, and that suggests God is the one who provides, protects, supports, and mentors. And throughout the biblical record, that's exactly what we see. God providing, well, in creation, God providing the world and what's necessary for life, right? God protecting his people, like bringing them out of slavery in Egypt, for the Judeans in the south, keeping them from being destroyed by the Babylonians, and so forth. God supports. So, King David would talk about God's support even in times of trouble. And certainly mentors, God taught. And the most clear example of that mentorship is the 10 Commandments. God teaches his people how to function so that life would be whole and complete. And so all those roles that are typically parental, right, are ascribed to God. Then to say the word Almighty, God the Father Almighty, that implies that God is an all-powerful being. That means that God has the necessary power to both create and sustain creation, including humans. And it's that sustaining thing that's, I think, an important part of this picture, because there was, some theories, it often goes by the name of the watchmaker theory, that is that God put everything in place, wound it up, and then just let it go, right? But that's not what Christians believe. And that's not what the Jewish people believe. They believe that God is still active in sustaining the world, that we have life because God is still active and involved in the world. So God isn't a distant creator that's just kind of watching the creation from afar, but rather God is still involved in the, I would say, one way to put it is in the unfolding creation. The creation is still unfolding in a sense. Okay? So even though the first article of the Creed focuses on God's creative work, Scripture reveals all three persons of the Trinity involved in the act of creation and the sustaining of life on earth. So this is going to surprise some of you maybe. So we got a couple of scripture passages to look up. Here's the first one. 1 Corinthians 8, 5-6. So I'll give you a minute to look that up and read it, and then we'll talk about it. First Corinthians 8, 5 and 6. All right. So, what do you see there? What does it say that indicates that another person in the Trinity is involved in creation?
The same thing about God the Father and God and Jesus.
And Jesus.
Both say.
Yeah. So here you have an indication. Paul is saying that creation came into existence through Jesus. Right? So there's an indication that Jesus, what Paul is saying is Jesus didn't just sort of show up in the year, 2,000 years ago, but Jesus has been in existence all along and was there when creation happened. Right? And in fact, the way Paul talks about it here, that creation came through Jesus. Now, what exactly is meant by that, I think we need to leave in the realm of mystery. But there is a sense in which Jesus is responsible for creation as much as God the Father. Okay? So creation comes through Christ. Okay, so there's the one. By the way, the earlier verses there, you notice Paul is acknowledging, that there's other gods and lords that you talk about, but notice, at least my translation, the NRSV, puts those both in lowercase, lords and gods, in lowercase L and G. So he's acknowledging, you folks talk about gods and lords, and he's acknowledging that, but he says, we believe in one God, right? So he's saying, so there you get one God, and notice Paul is saying one God, and yet he's mentioning God the Father and God the Son. Yet he's talking about one God. So what I'm trying to show you here is the concept of the Trinity is not something that was made up later on. I mean, the terminology and the way it was talked about were developed later on. But the concept that Jesus, was one with the Father, is there from the very beginning, right? From the very earliest Christian writings. All right, so that's the work of Jesus, or the Christ. Now, I want you to look at Job 33, verse 4. Now, this may be dependent on translation, so it may or may not work for your version. Okay, Job 33, just one verse. So what do you see that it says? This is the Spirit. Right? So the Spirit of God has made me. And the breath, that is the Spirit, because the Hebrew word for spirit is ruach, which is also means breath or wind, right? So the Spirit of God has made me, and the Spirit of the Almighty gives me life. And this was certainly an understanding of the work of the Spirit. The work of the Spirit is to give life. And so when we think of the life of the church, the Spirit gives life to the church at what event? At Pentecost, right? And Pentecost is at the experience, there's two symbols of the Spirit's presence. What are the two symbols? No, not Pentecost. You've got the wind and fire. You got the fire appearing on their heads, but I think the most important thing is the wind, right? Because that is the wind or ruach, right? So the wind blows into the room, and they are filled with the Spirit, and that changes them, and the church is born, and the church is sustained. The church's life is sustained by the work of the Spirit. But in the same way, things like this passage from Job indicate, well, in fact, life in general is sustained by the Spirit. This is not that surprising if we understand how we measure life, right? So we will say that someone no longer has life when they stop what? Breathing. So the fact that there's this breath that is happening that gives us life, right? So the ancients understood that, well, that's the Spirit of God that is giving us life, right? So that doesn't surprise us. The Spirit of God has made me. So I just want to throw that out there so you understand that that when we talk about God as creator in the first article, that does not mean that the Spirit and Christ are not involved also, but it's sort of the primary way to speak about God the Father. All right, so now I promised you that we would look at the biblical creation accounts and try and unpack their meaning, because remember that's what I said the creation accounts are there for. They're there to ascribe meaning. They're to tell us the meaning of this God's involvement in the world. So the book of Genesis has two creation stories that have been placed together. They have different styles and different emphases. And one of the problems has been that people have melded the two together forever. But especially biblical scholars will tell you that the first chapter has a different grammar, different vocabulary than the second chapter. And so they are different stories, but they're both about creation. And if you look at them carefully, like from just a textual critical standpoint, like the order that things happen in are different in chapter 1 and chapter 2. So they're not trying to describe a technical process by which creation came into being. That's not what they're trying to describe. So the ancients, who were not stupid, I mean, this is the thing to remember, they were just as intelligent as we are, right? They would have understood that these stories had differences, but that wasn't a problem because they each said something important. And that was the key. So we need to figure out what the emphases are, what is important. All right, so Genesis 1 is the first creation story, except that it bleeds into Genesis 2. And this is one thing that's baffled me forever. Like the numbering system that we have in our Bibles, that was developed much later. Like it didn't come with the original text. And why... and it's not even like it's to chapter 2, verse 4a, because then to get the next story, you start at 4b, the second. Like it's, to me, whoever was dividing things up, they didn't see the obvious there, at least obvious to me. Anyways, basically, I'm going to say chapter 1, chapter 2, with the understanding that when I say chapter 1, it actually goes a few verses into chapter 2. All right, so I suggest that chapter 1, one of its primary emphases, one of its primary themes is that creation, or that God does creation in an orderly manner and with intention. And what that says is we are here on purpose, not by accident. So Genesis 1 tells us that our existence is intentional. And even if we were like what used to be called an accident, we weren't intending to have that child, but it happened. According to the Christian faith, nothing is an accident, right? We are all here on purpose, and we are all here with God's intention. And the way that we understand this is we look at how chapter 1 kind of unfolds. So it unfolds in this orderly fashion. So if you want to turn to chapter 1, right, there will be some things that you will recognize immediately. This is, the story that is quite familiar, right? So when I say that it describes things as orderly, why would I say that? If you just kind of scan through chapter 1. What happens in chapter 1? Like just describe the process. Yeah, it starts with light, and then
Day 1, day 2, day 3.
day 1, day 2, day 3, and things, just sort of naturally build on what came before. So this is put in place, and then that allows this to be put in place, which allows this to be put in place, and so on and so forth. Here's the astounding thing about this chapter to me, is that the order that things show up, all except the sun and the moon, everything else, the order is exactly the order that things show up according to the scientific account. It's the same order. And in fact, what I would suggest is that the translation in the first day where it says, God said, let there be light, I would just use a different word that we would understand, and that is energy. God said, let there be energy. And then from that came all the other things. And so to me, it was fascinating that somehow the ancients, and maybe it's because God revealed it to them, but the ancients understood this sort of orderly process, that this had to come first. So what's the next thing that we get? We get water. And we know that water is required for life as we understand it. And then after water, comes the land. So then now there's somewhere for mammals to live, but the mammals don't show up yet. And then the first creatures that show up in where? Where do they show up? They're in the water and the air. So it's birds and fish, right? But what scientific account says is that, the first organisms that show up in the water. And then eventually, organisms start showing up on Earth, right? You get plants showing up before animals, right? And the last thing that shows up are mammals, livestock, and humans. Humans are, right? So it's fascinating that the order is actually the same order that science says, except for one thing, like I said, and that's the sun and the moon. So why do the sun and the moon show up later in the order? And it's not as if, the ancients wouldn't have understood that, well, hold it, if you're going to have day and night, you have to have the sun and the moon, right? So the first few days, where's that? The whole point, I think, of this is to say that God is beyond nature. God is not the sun or the moon, but rather God is beyond those things identified by other religions as gods. So can you name one of the ancient religions that understood the sun as an important god that would have been around for the early Jewish people? Egypt, exactly. And so this was kind of a way of saying to the Egyptians, those things that you worship as gods, Well, no, they're not gods. They were created by the one true God. And so we don't worship them as gods. And so they're kind of demoted in a sense. So they're not the agents of creation. They show up at some point in creation, but they're not the agents of creation. And that's really kind of why they show up at that point. I heard that explanation. I heard another explanation that said that light shows up in the first day, but because the earth was covered with a cloud cover that was thick, it was translucent, but it wasn't transparent, so you couldn't see the sun and the moon. That was someone else's interpretation. And eventually, the water cycle develops, and then you get clouds and clear sky. There's different ways of understanding this, but that's the one thing that is kind of out of order. But things appear in order, right? And there's a repeated phrase that shows up in this first chapter. What's the repeated phrase?
It was good.
It was good. It was good. And so what is that affirming? That creation is good. That what God put in place is good. By its very nature, it is good. And so that's these early Jewish people saying, this world that we live in was intended to be good, including humans. Because humans are part of that creation, right? And in fact, the one time that the word shifts, instead of saying, and it was good, it says something different, is after humans are created. So this is on day 6. Did you see the change? Just look at day 6. So you have to go here to verse 31.
He was pleased.
Yeah. But it says, and
Very good.
it was very good.
Oh, I don't have that one.
Yeah, it was very good. So then that's talking about, again, this is when humans show up. It's sort of like the capstone of creation. It's like the pinnacle. Now everything is put in place. Now comes the humans, and it is very good. That's quite an affirmation. So when I was in seminary, there was a book came out by a guy named Matthew Fox. And the book was called Original Blessing. And the premise of the book was this, that for too long, the church focused on chapter 3, which is the fall and the original curse, right? And original sin, right? Original sin. And he said, no, he says, we have to remember that there is this affirmation in chapter 1 that we were created very good. And so that was the original blessing, that God speaks the blessing to the earth saying, this is good. And so then what Matthew Fox's premise was, is that then we have to seek to bring that goodness out, or to reveal that goodness, both within our human behavior. So we need to encourage one another to be loving, kind, caring, and so forth, right? But also to understand that the world around us is good and shouldn't be destroyed. So it is sort of like environmental concerns, The world is good. We shouldn't mess with it. We're supposed to be caretakers, which comes from chapter 2, which we'll get to in a minute here. But that goodness is built into the world, and we need to honor it, respect it, highlight it, and work with it. So that all comes from chapter 1. This very methodical, intentional unfolding of creation. And you'll see how this is in contrast with other creation accounts from other cultures, which we'll look at in a minute. But that's, I think, enough of chapter 1. So now we're going to look at the other creation story, which starts in verse 4b and goes to the end of the chapter. So just skim that quickly. But again, you'll know this story. All right, I know you could read more, but I'm just going to jump in here. So this is the Garden of Eden story, right? And if you were to say with one word, what do you think is the primary theme of this story? So if we said the first story is about order and intention, what is the primary theme about this story? What is it trying to say about what is important? What is the meaning of life?
Maybe companion?
Okay, all right, so you're getting there. Okay, so companion. So what word have we talked about in this study so far that is important for our faith? Relationship. And that's exactly it. This is a story that talks about relationship. And it talks about our human relationship with God and our relationship with one another. Right? And we get clues to this based on what the story portrays. So there's an intimacy in this story that you don't have in the first story. In the first story, God speaks, and then that comes into being. In this story, how are humans created?
Dirt.
Yeah, but what is the process sort of that's portrayed? How is God portrayed as the creator? What is the creator doing?
Breathe.
Yeah, prior to breathing. That's an important part of the story too. But prior to breathing, what does God do?
He has everything ready.
Yeah, he has everything ready, but then he literally kind of like sculpts. He forms, so it's like he's working with clay or whatever, right? And he forms the man from the earth, but the man is still inanimate, is just a clay statue, you might say, right? Or an earthen statue. So what gives the man life? God breathes into the man, right? And then the man is life. So this is a hands-on picture of creation. Like literally, God is using his hands to sculpt this being, and then using his own spirit, his own breath, to enliven that being, right? So hands-on. But then you get other examples of this intimacy, this relationship, because what seems to be happening between God and this man, Adam? Like what are they doing that indicates relationship?
He takes that rib.
Okay, that comes. Yeah, that comes.
He names all the animals.
Yeah, but okay, so Adam is given the job to name all the animals. How does Adam know he's gotten that job? God told him. There's the key. There's conversation. Right? So it's not just that God formed this Adam and then is nowhere to be seen. God is right there in the garden with Adam, giving Adam a specific task. And the task that he gives him is to name all the animals. And now, how does naming relate to relationship? It's the way that we function in relationships. We name something so that we can call them by name to indicate that we have a relationship with them, right? So a more intimate relationship, rather than saying, hey, you with the 4 legs and the spots, come over here. I want to, we say, hey, leopard, I think you're beautiful. And then the leopard goes, oh, thank you. I got these new spots just, or whatever the leopard might say, I don't know. But you understand the naming is actually an indication of humans' relationship with the world. We are not separate from the world. We are part of the world. We are part of nature, and we are all named. And so God is saying to the human, recognize your relationship with these creatures, with these creatures that are around you, right? So that's relationship. Conversation is relationship. And then, of course, the ultimate picture of relationship is God determines that it's not good for the man to be alone. And so we have the creation of the woman, right? Now, the creation of the woman is also an interesting picture because unlike, again, chapter 1, where you have God speaking and it is, we have a very hands-on picture of how the woman is created, which is how?
Takes Adam's rib.
Yeah, it's like surgery, right? In other words, God is in there again with his hands. First of all, Adam goes to sleep, and then God, takes a rib, and then out of this rib forms this woman somehow, right? And so again, it's a hands-on picture. And now, here's my other question that I always pose to the class at Luther, and some of them get it and some of them don't. We'll see if you get it. Okay, why is the part of Adam that is used to create Eve, why is it a rib? Why do you think, what is the meaning of that?
Be a partner, side-by-side partner.
Very good. You were quick. It's a side-by-side partnership, right? Sometimes they'll go, because it's close to the heart. Okay, that's sort of the romantic idea. But I think that the better indication is that this is to be someone who is like but different, someone who is in relationship with but is also a unique individual, someone who has connection with, but most importantly, someone who is an equal partner, side-by-side partner. Because if the people the ancients who wrote this wanted to indicate that the woman was to be subjugated, would have been a foot bone. Mm-hmm. Or if the woman was to be superior to, would have been from the skull. Right? But coming from the rib, it's a picture of a side-by-side partnership. And so, to go along with, I think, chapter 1 story, which says is very good, this is saying, from the beginning, human relationship is important and significant, and humans need to treat each other as equal partners, not dominate. That gets lost very quick, right? So that's the meaning of this story. So here's some things. Humans' relationship, both with God and the world around us. That's one of the emphasis of this second creation story, right? That there's a recognition of partnership of humans with each other and with God. So the partnership with God is that God gives the humans this task, right? And then after the woman is created, then what is the task to do? Did you get to that part?
Most.
Anyways, they're supposed to tend the garden, right? Yeah. So there's a partnership that's going on here between God and humans, as well as between humans. And I think you could actually add into that partnership even with animals, right? Like the other animals, there's a partnership that goes on there. That's one of the things I used to appreciate about some of the indigenous ways of interacting with the animals. Like the thing that used to, even as a child, I remember being sort of impressed with this. Like if they killed a deer, right, then they gave thanks to the deer for providing food. Like there was this sense in which, it's like, you have given me yourself so that my family can live. And I thank you for that gift. Like there's that recognition of this sort of partnership that goes on, okay? So there's identification of humans as being stewards of creation, thus caring for the environment, is an ancient understanding of our purpose as humans. So remember I said that that faith looks at questions of meaning and purpose. So here's one of the purposes stated right off the bat. One of the purposes is to care for God's creation. And humans can do that better than any other animal because of our intelligence, our creativity. And so, but conversely, humans can also do more damage than any other animal, right? And we've seen both. Like we've seen humans do amazing things in terms of caring for the world and stewarding creation, and we've seen humans do horrific things. They've done both, right? They've done both. All right. Yes, Ray.
So the idea that that humans were put on earth to dominate.
Yes.
Paul.
Yeah.
Is not from the Bible?
No, it is here, but how that word is used is like have dominion over or whatever. A better word to use is stewardship, to have stewardship over. So a steward in biblical times was someone who was given responsibility to care for like let's say the farm, given responsibility to care for the farm while the owner of the land was not available. So that was what a steward was. And so there was a sense in which that humans were given this world to steward because it belongs to God. It still belongs to God. It's not yours. And I think, unfortunately, using the English word have dominion over very quickly got translated into have domination over. Yeah. So I think a better term to use is to have stewardship over. So that is from here. It's okay. Chapter 1. It's from chapter 1. It's verse 26. So this NRSV says, "And God said, let us make humankind in our image, according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, over the cattle, and over all the wild animals, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." So have dominion over is that's where I would say I would rather use the word stewardship, because it's too close to domination. Like it sounds like we're just, and some people have actually used that verse to say we can do whatever we want with the world. And that is a bad understanding of the purpose, especially when you follow it up with the chapter 2 story, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, you guys, all right, now, how are we doing for time? Oh, we're going to do it. We're going to get to the end. So I promised you I would show you one of the ways to understand the creation stories that we have in the Bible is to compare them with other creation stories that were around at the time. And the best contrast that we can come up with is the contrast with the Babylonian account. So the Babylonian creation tale, known as Enuma Elish, has the god Marduk killing the goddess of primordial chaos, Tiamat, and forming the heavens and earth from her body. Okay? Any of you remember the cartoon Marduk?
Yeah.
What was Marduk? Yeah, it was a big dog. Yeah. Anyways, named after this Babylonian god. So you have Marduk killing Tiamat and then forming from her dead body the heavens and the earth, right? And then Marduk kills one of Tiamat's sons, a rebellious god named Kingu, and combines Kingu's blood with clay and fashions humans from this mixture. And Marduk creates humans to be slaves to do the dirty work so that the gods could be free to enjoy their leisure. Okay? So now you compare that creation story with what you find in Genesis, and you can see a huge contrast. This is a story filled with violence and domination, right? Except here it's the gods who are dominating, and humans are just like slaves. They're just slaves. That's their purpose. Slaves are way different from stewards, right? Violence is way different from order and intention. And it's in this contrast that you can see where the writers of Genesis really kind of understood the world in a different way, and our purpose and our place in the world, the meaning of life. So for the Babylonian account, the meaning of life is grim. The meaning of life is, well, we just got to kind of muddle through it, and it's the gods have their play things, and we're the playthings, and we just have to do what the gods say, and there's not much hope, and there's not much joy, and we just kind of have to survive. That's the meaning of life according to the Babylonian account. The meaning of life according to the Genesis account is we are given the gift of creation to enjoy and given a purpose, and that is to be stewards of creation and to be in relationship with God and with one another and with creation. And that's the meaning of life. So I would contend that when I say that the Christian faith is about relationship first and foremost, it begins right there in chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. So, here, just for your visual enjoyment, this is Babylonian art depicting their creation account. So you can see you've got the one god, that's Marduk on the right there, killing, that might be Kingu on the left. I'm not sure if that's Kingu or if that's Tiamat. But, there's violence going on, and it doesn't look like a happy scene whatsoever. That's their creation account. Now compare that with, and I've got this really neat, I found this really neat sort of, what would you call it? I don't know. It's kind of artwork. Anyways, here's artwork depicting the Genesis 1. Right? You got the 6 days of creation illustrated there beautifully. No sense of violence in that at all. Just beauty and diversity, which is one of the things I haven't talked about yet, but one of the things I think that the Genesis 1 also portrays is that God created a world filled with diversity, and that was intentional. So the diversity of our world, that we've got creatures that live in the water and creatures that fly above the air or fly in the air, and creatures that live on the land, and some slither and some have 4 legs and run and so on and so forth. And we've got stars and moon, and we've got clouds, and we've got trees, and we've got fruit, and on and on and on, right? That diversity is intentional, right? And there's a beauty in that diversity. Or if not beauty, we could say there's sort of a curiosity, an interest. It's like, what else is out there? Like, have you seen pictures of the creatures that they found in the very depths of the ocean? These strange creatures that exist way, way, way down, and how they are very unusual characteristics that they have. Like, we're still discovering new creatures. And we've been looking all our lives, all of our history, we've been looking for new creatures, and we're still finding them. That's astounding to me, right? I just read one the other day about there's a mouse. I think I don't know if it's in the Himalayas or if it's in the Andes, but there's a mouse that exists at an altitude that scientists previously thought no mammal could exist at. And yet there's a mouse that exists at that altitude. It's like, what? Look what we found, right? And then I still want to know, what's the story with Sasquatch? Or Yeti, or like any of these. Like there's mysteries out there that we don't understand. My, favorite story of recently of creation sort of saying, hey, you guys, smarten up, is the orcas that have been attacking yachts or boats. Have you heard about this? And actually sinking some of them. And it's almost like, the orcas are saying, you know what? You humans are messing up the ocean. We're tired of it, and we're just going to, fight back a little bit. That might be attributing too much to this, but this is a brand new behavior of the orcas. What's precipitated that? Where does that come from? There's mysteries in our world that we aren't even close to beginning to understand. And then, okay, so that's creation 1 story. Here's creation 2. This is a great painting that shows beauty, diversity, and mystery. I don't know if you can see it because it's pretty small. But this is God creating Eve.
That's God.
That's God creating Eve. There's Adam having a snooze because he's been put to sleep. How did the ancients know that the best way to do surgery is you put someone to sleep? They didn't have that means in those days. You ever wonder that? Like, that story tells us about anesthetic. Way before anesthetics existed. Am I saying that right? Anesthetics?
Yes.
Anyways, there's Eve being sort of drawn out or being formed out. It's a fascinating little painting. So that's the images that we have in the creation accounts. These beautiful, fascinating images of the purpose and meaning of life. All right. So now, to wrap up, how are we doing? Oh, this is going to time out just perfect. All right, we're going to end by looking at Luther's explanation of the first article. from the Small Catechism. And it's always, like, to me, the Small Catechism is a book you can return to over and over again. Because Luther really summarizes things well in the Catechism. So this is what Luther says about the first article, which is, again, I believe in God the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth. Luther says, what it means is, God has made me and all creatures. That God is giving me my body and soul, eyes, ears, and all my members, so it'd be like all the different parts of myself, my reason and all my senses, and, notice this line, still takes care of them. So God is still present in creation. God is still active in sustaining our lives, right? One of the things I like about this is that Luther is recognizing the gift of intelligence, right? That intelligence, which humans have, right? It's part of that holistic understanding of human life, right? Is a gift. It was given by God. And my senses. So the senses that we enjoy this world with, like you've seen my posts of my sunset and sunrise pictures, some of you, and or the moon, or like we get to enjoy creation because we can see it with our eyes, we can hear it with our ears, like bird song and whatever. We can smell it, like there's nothing like smelling, walking through a forest after a rain. There's a very particular smell there that's beautiful. I don't know if you've ever been to a forest where there's cedar trees, and then after a rain, it's like, oh man, that smell is just wonderful. We can feel it. Like there's nothing more enjoyable than petting a dog or a cat that's just content to be there, and you just get to stroke their fur, and on, right? Our senses is what enables us to enjoy life. But Luther continues. God also gives me clothing and shoes, food and drink, house and home, wife and children, land, animals, and all I have. So how is it that God gives me clothing and shoes? Is God actually forming those things, creating those things? Well, no. So how can Luther say that God gives me clothing and shoes? How can Luther say that?
Because the materials to build those is God's creation.
Exactly, Scott. That's exactly it. The materials that enable us to make these things are there in creation for us, right? And so all that we have, Luther says, really always finds its origin in God. And so now think about wife and children. So what story does that relate to? Which creation story? Number two. The recognition of these relationships that are important and meaningful to us. Where do they have their origins? In God, right? But Luther isn't finished, because he still says, God richly and daily provides me with all that I need to support this body and life. So there's that acknowledgement again that God is active in sustaining our lives, right? And God defends me against all danger and guards and protects me from all evil. Now, if we were to understand this overly literally, then there would be a problem, because there have been people of faith who have died in accidents, who have been killed in wars, who have, but there is a sense, and Luther would have this understanding, that this protection from all evil is the key, that we are protected from an ultimate destiny of being separate from God, because the evil forces that seek to draw us away from God, that seek to destroy our relationship with God, that God defends us against those. So when Luther is saying God defends me against all danger and guards and protects me from all evil, he's not talking about primarily the dangers of what other humans might do to us, but he's talking about the dangers of what the forces of evil might do to us. And I just want to make that clear, because there are some people who will say that I don't believe there's a God because, good people have bad things happen to them. So then how is there a God? But Luther would say, and he had plenty of bad things happen to him. Luther would say, no, but God is still protecting me against evil in its ultimate consequence. So all this is how Luther sums up. All this God does out of fatherly, divine goodness and mercy without any merit or worthiness in me. In other words, I didn't earn this gift of life and this place in this world. I didn't earn it. It was a gift to me, and thus I need to function out of, well, if you get a gift, what is an important thing that you need to do? You have to say thank you. You have to be grateful. You have to show gratitude. And so, Luther ends, for all this, it is my duty to thank and praise, serve and obey him. So Luther's response to creation is gratitude, and then attempting to live our lives according to God's will, or to obey God, right? So that's the meaning of life. The meaning of life is to recognize it as a gift, to function out of gratitude and humility, I would add, and to seek to be good stewards, because that's what God asks us to do. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we finished the Article 1 just in time. Perfect timing. All right. But I will give you a few minutes if anyone has any questions or comments they want to make at the end here. And that could be anything from today or any of the previous 3 weeks, because this is your last chance before we take a break. Any questions or comments from anyone?
I love the feeling of intention, not an accident. I love all the way the
Yep.
thread is intention.
Intention is, I don't know when I first came across that, but it's been an important way for me to understand and to teach the students over there. Intention. Because some of them, well, some of us, at different times in life have felt like, why am I even here? I'm just an accident. I don't, it doesn't matter. My life doesn't matter, whatever, right? This says, no, your life matters. It's intentional. Anyone online have something? You know what I'm going to do here? I'm going to stop the share so we can see you all. There you are. Look at that. Anybody out there have any questions or comments they want to make? Are your minds just... Marilyn, go ahead.
Just a quick one, Pastor Dennis. Any of the communications that you send out, I'm not receiving in the email.
You're not receiving them? Okay.
No.
I will check, Marilyn, to see what's the problem with that. Sometimes it means I typed in an email address wrong. So, all right, I'll make sure you get that so that you can have access to that stuff.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay, thank you. As I said, now this is the end of our session until the new year, and that the 17th is most likely the day we will start. And then we'll do another block of 4. And what that block of 4 will cover is the second and perhaps the third article of the Apostles' Creed. And then there might be a third block of 4 that we do post-Easter, but we'll see how things go. But this seemed to be a good place to stop this one, and I appreciate everyone's participation and their attention and their comments and their questions. So let's conclude with a prayer. Gracious God, we thank you that you have gifted us with this creation that we are part of. Help us to be good stewards, to be in good relationship with you and with one another, that we might proclaim to the world that there is purpose and meaning that you have given to us. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, have a good day. And we'll see you sooner or later.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.
Bye.